In today's video, we're examining 5 children who got eaten alive by deadly animals. From a boy's fatal curiosity with a lion, to a school camping trip that a bear turned into a nightmare. But first we begin in Florida, where a 10-year-old comes face to face with an American crocodile. It was April 19, 2014 in Key Largo, Florida. The air was heavy with the damp warmth of spring, the canals lined with mangroves. The rented house at the canal's edge looked over quiet water, a setting that seemed safe enough for a boy with a fishing rod. Yet beneath the surface, movement stirred. Ethan Parker was 10 years old, visiting from Orlando during spring break with his grandparents. His parents had stayed behind for work, trusting their son would be well cared for on the trip. Ethan was known in his family for his fascination with fishing. He carried a small rod on every vacation, eager to try it wherever water was near. That week, he had spent most afternoons at the dock, crouched over the edge with a bucket of baitfish, perfectly content to sit longer than most children his age. His grandparents encouraged it. They were pleased that Ethan preferred fishing to television, seeing it as a quiet hobby that kept him busy and outdoors. That evening, while his grandmother prepared dinner and his grandfather checked the grill, Ethan asked if he could stay out a little longer. The canal looked calm, the water glassy except for the ripples where baitfish broke the surface. His grandfather agreed, leaving him only a few yards away at the dock while the meal was set. The canal was narrow, hemmed in by mangroves whose roots knotted into the water. As the sun lowered, the water took on a dark, copper sheen. It was the kind of place where sound carried strangely, an occasional splash echoing louder than it should. Neighbors often remarked on the wildlife that passed through, but to someone unfamiliar, it could appear peaceful. Neighbors had noted a large crocodile patrolling the canal earlier in the week. One man had even warned his wife not to let their dog near the water. But with no official notices posted, Ethan's grandparents assumed the canal was safe. As baitfish wriggled in Ethan's hand, the ripples spread into the shadows. He leaned closer, dangling the line inches above the surface. The American crocodile, while less aggressive than its alligator cousin, is a formidable predator. Adult males can exceed 12 feet in length, weighing between 600 and 1,000 pounds. They inhabit brackish canals and mangrove estuaries, relying on stealth to ambush prey. Their bite force is among the strongest in the animal kingdom, designed to hold rather than slice, and they use spinning death rolls to drown victims. Attacks on humans in Florida are rare, but in enclosed waters where fish scraps attract them, crocodiles may approach docks and homes. His grandmother, standing near the porch door, noticed a sudden surge in the water. It broke in a rush of spray as a large crocodile lunged upward. Its jaws clamped around Ethan's leg, the sound of the impact carrying across the canal. He screamed as the animal jerked backward, pulling him from the dock into the water with a single violent motion. His grandfather reacted instantly, grabbing a net pole and plunging into the canal after him. The water thrashed as Ethan's small frame disappeared beneath coils of spray in the reptile's body. The crocodile spun in a death roll, dragging him deeper. His grandfather swung wildly, striking the animal's back and tail, but each strike seemed to vanish into the mass of water and motion. Neighbors, alerted by the screams, rushed to their porches in time to see the struggle. For a brief moment, Ethan's head surfaced. Blood streaked the water around him as his arms flailed. But the cry that escaped was cut short as he was pulled under again almost immediately. The crocodile submerged, this time not resurfacing. His grandfather staggered out of the canal, gasping, his hands empty. He asked the bystanders to call for help. Search crews arrived within the hour, sweeping the canal through the night. Divers entered carefully, aware that the crocodile could still be near. At dawn, they located Ethan's body lodged against mangrove roots not far from the dock. His injuries show crushing force to his legs and torso, consistent with multiple rolls. The funeral was held quietly in Orlando, attended only by family and a few close friends. His parents requested privacy, declining interviews. Days later, wildlife officers trapped and euthanized the crocodile believed responsible. The Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission released only a short statement to local papers, noting the rarity of such incidents but urging residents to avoid canal edges at dusk. Yet even as the dark waters of Florida's canals claimed another young life, thousands of miles away in the golden grasslands of South Africa's Limpopo province, a 12-year-old boy would discover that the magnificent predators he had grown to love possessed an ancient hunger. It was July 2, 2015 in Limpopo province, South Africa. The evening sun sat low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the dry grasslands of a small private game reserve. The day's heat had begun to fade, but the stillness carried a weight, broken only by the calls of birds settling for the night. It was the kind of silence that gave the illusion of safety, though just beyond the fences, predators watched in anticipation of their evening meal. Sifo Mele was 12 years old, from a nearby village where his family lived modestly. His uncle worked at the reserve as a caretaker, responsible for assisting in daily feedings and maintenance. Sifo often tagged along when school was out, fascinated by the lions housed there. For him, it was less about tourism and more about awe. The animals he saw in storybooks stood living and breathing just a few feet away. Though small for his age, Sifo was bold, known among his peers for creeping close to enclosures and peering in with wide eyes. His uncle tolerated his curiosity, proud of his nephew's interest, but wary of his fearlessness. On that Thursday, Sifo joined his uncle and two workers as they wheeled in raw meat for the evening feeding. The lions had been pacing their enclosure all afternoon, aware of the routine. Tourists who stayed at the reserve watched from a nearby platform, cameras ready. Sifo, excited by the spectacle, wanted to see closer. He trailed behind the group, and in the brief moment where one of the gates was not fully latched, he slipped through before his uncle could react. Waving as if to show he was braver than the others, he darted forward. His uncle shouted for him to get out, his voice cutting through the stillness. Lions are powerful ambush predators, capable of sprinting up to 35 miles per hour in short bursts. Adult males can weigh over 400 pounds, with jaws strong enough to crush bone. In captivity, their instincts remain intact, and feeding time heightens aggression. Any sudden movements, especially from someone small, can trigger a chase or attack response. Keepers know to stay behind barriers and never enter the enclosure unarmed, particularly when food is present. There have been quiet warnings before. Workers had told Sifo's uncle more than once to keep the boy away from feeding. Even tourists noticed the lion's agitation when people moved too close to the gate. That evening, Sifo ignored his uncle's urgent calls, stepping further inside the feeding zone. The animals, already keyed up by the sight and smell of meat, began circling closer. The boy's excitement blinded him to their change in behavior. Before Sifo could retreat, one of the male lions lunged from the side. The strike was immediate, an explosion of muscle and dust. The impact knocked him flat to the ground. Tourists on the platform gasped as the lion's jaws clamped down on his torso, lifting and shaking him. Workers dropped the wheelbarrow and rushed forward, striking the lion with long poles. The animal snarled, but refused to release. Within moments, a second lion joined. This one seized Sifo's arm, pulling in the opposite direction. The boy's scream cut short as the animals dragged them across the dirt into the grass. His uncle charged forward, shouting for help, but the lions tore at him with violent jerks. Witnesses described the scene as chaos, dust rising, men shouting, the lions' roars carrying over the enclosure. The struggle lasted less than a minute. Workers beat at the animals, but the lions only adjusted their grip. One paw pinned Siffo's leg while the other lion pulled his arm further apart. The boy's small frame was no match for their combined force. Blood streaked the ground as his body was wrenched back and forth. His uncle stumbled, unable to get closer without being struck himself. Guards armed with rifles arrived, firing shots into the air. The sound cracked across the reserve, startling the lions enough that they released their hold. They stood over Siffo briefly, growling, before retreating toward the feeding pile. The workers pulled the boy back, but his body was limp, torn beyond saving. The tourists who had remained stood frozen, some turning away as the scene ended. One called for help, a futile attempt. Within the day, authorities secured the enclosure, moving the lions to a holding pen. Siffo's body was carried out quietly, covered in the sheet. His uncle sat nearby, shaking, his clothes smeared with blood and dust. By the time local police arrived, the reserve had already begun discussing how to handle the incident. Siffo's funeral was held in his village 2 days later, attended by hundreds who walked in silence behind the family. The boy's coffin was small, the service brief, as custom dictated. His death was not broadcast widely, though whispers of it spread quickly among nearby communities. The reserve made no public announcement beyond confirming the accident in a provincial police report. The lions involved were destroyed the same evening, a decision officials said was necessary to prevent further damage. The African savanna bore witness to another child's tragic encounter with apex predators. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away in Kinshasa Zoo, a 9-year-old boy's fascination with the animal kingdom would lead him face to face with a 400-pound silverback. It was March 17, 2016 in Kinshasa, Democratic Republic of Congo. The morning at the city zoo began with the ordinary noise of school children moving in groups, voices echoing across pathways lined with enclosures. Teachers called for order, but excitement carried louder than discipline. Few noticed the risk behind the low concrete walls topped with short railings, where powerful animals lived within arm's reach of thin barriers. By midday, that normalcy would collapse into something none of the children could forget. Mitchell Bakuba was 9 years old, a quiet boy from a working-class family. He was curious about animals in a way that made teachers describe him as attentive, though prone to wandering too close when something caught his eye. His parents allowed him to go on the field trip because he loved the idea of seeing the gorillas, creatures he had only known from books. At home, Mitchell often sat alone sketching animals, copying from magazines while his classmates played soccer. The zoo visit was a chance to see his fascination up close. He had a habit of climbing on the railings to get a better view, a behavior his parents tolerated at home, but one that worried teachers in public places. On this trip, he lingered at the back of the group near the gorilla enclosure. The adult supervising called for the children to stay behind the painted line, but Mitchell leaned over the low wall and railing, eager to look closer. To him, the distance seemed safe. The group was large, the enclosure familiar to tourists, and the gorilla inside appeared calm. His decision to lean further was not reckless defiance, but the kind of misjudgment a child could make, believing the boundary was enough. The gorilla habitat stretched across a wide pit, bounded by concrete walls and sparse vegetation. Dust and the smell of animals carried on the humid air. The viewing platform was crowded with students pressed against the barrier, their voices echoing. In the middle of the enclosure, a large male western lowland gorilla named Moba rested in the shade, his massive shoulders rising with steady breath. To the children above, he seemed distant, his stillness an illusion of safety. Western lowland gorillas are among the largest primates, with adult males weighing over 400 pounds and standing nearly 6 feet tall when upright. They're generally shy in the wild, but in captivity their behavior can shift unpredictably. A gorilla's strength is immense. Its bite force capable of crushing bone, its arms able to hurl objects or bodies with devastating force. Keepers understood that sudden movements or intrusions could trigger territorial aggression. Several warnings came in rapid succession. Mitchell's classmates noticed him leaning further and shouted for him to step back. A teacher raised her voice, calling his name. The noise of the group drowned out the urgency, and before anyone could react further, Mitchell lost his footing. His small frame tumbled over the barrier, landing in the dirt just yards from Moba. The screams that followed were immediate. Dozens of children calling out in terror. The gorilla reacted with a sudden display, rising, beating his chest once, then charging on all fours, dust flying from the ground as he closed the distance. Mitchell scrambled to his feet and tried to run toward the wall, but the gorilla reached him in seconds. The animal's hand seized his leg, yanking him backward with such force that his body struck the ground hard. A wave of shouting erupted from the platform as teachers tried to shield children's eyes, but many saw everything. Moba swung Mitchell against the concrete wall, the boy's body colliding with a dull crack. Then he lifted him again and slammed him down into the dirt. Teachers later testified that the animal pounded its fist on Mitchell's chest, blows that echoed up to the platform. Some witnesses saw the gorilla deliver a single heavy bite to his shoulder before shaking him violently, then returning to strikes and throws. The boy's body jerked under the force, his cries fading quickly. Zoo staff rushed into position with tranquilizer rifles, but preparation took time. For nearly 3 minutes, chaos reigned. Children clung to the railings, sobbing, while teachers shouted for them to turn away. Workers struck the enclosure walls with poles, but Moba ignored the noise. He continued to batter the boy, each motion precise and brutal, until sedative darts struck his body. Even then, it took another minute before the gorilla staggered and collapsed, his heavy breath slowing. By that time, Mitchell lay motionless in the dirt, blood pooling beneath his head. One of the staff called for paramedics, taking another 20 minutes to arrive. Doctors later confirmed that the injuries, severe head trauma, crushing chest injuries, and internal bleeding, would have been unsurvivable even with immediate treatment. His body was carried out under a sheet as staff hurried the children away from the scene. Mitchell's body was returned to his parents that evening. They held a quiet Catholic burial the next day, with family and neighbors gathered in subdued grief. His classmates didn't attend, though teachers later said the trip left many children shaken, unable to speak about what they had witnessed. Authorities placed responsibility on the inadequate barrier design, which allowed children to lean too close. Within weeks, the zoo reinforced the enclosures with higher railings and additional fencing. The gorilla Moba was not euthanized. Officials explained that he had only acted on instinct when a child entered his territory. The concrete walls of Kinshasa Zoo echoed with the screams of horrified school children. In another incident, thousands of miles away in the dense Amazon rainforest outside Manaus, an 11-year-old fisherman's son would learn that the spotted figures lurking in the jungle canopy possessed deadly jaws. It was October 12, 2017, on the outskirts of Manaus, Brazil. The afternoon heat lingered in the forest air, heavy with the smell of damp earth and vegetation. Children played as they often did, weaving through the trees near the riverbank, unaware that one careless decision would shift that ordinary day into a scene of panic and loss. Rafael Souza was 11 years old, the son of a fisherman who worked the waters of the Rio Negro. His family lived in a modest riverside house where Raphael spent most of his days exploring the forest with his cousins. Teachers described him as curious but restless, always eager to imitate adults and prove himself older than his years. At home, he was known for climbing trees and bringing back stories about birds and monkeys he had spotted. His mother often warned him to stay closer to the house, but like many children in the area, the jungle was his playground. The October school break gave Raphael more freedom to roam. That day, he and two cousins ventured deeper than usual, chasing a troop of small monkeys that had darted across the clearing. When they came upon the remains of an old hunting camp, its rusted cans and collapsed lean-to still scattered in the undergrowth, Raphael treated it like a discovery. He scrambled up a low tree, holding his cousin's old flip phone, pretending to take photographs of himself. The jungle canopy was dense, filtering light into broken patches of green and gold. Vines draped over rotting trunks, and insects hummed in constant rhythm. Beyond the abandoned camp, thick brush concealed much of the ground, making visibility short. The cousins didn't notice how still the birds had gone, or how the monkeys that had drawn them there had vanished without sound. What appeared to the children as ordinary forest quiet was, to any hunter or villager, a sign that a predator was nearby. Jaguars are apex predators of the Amazon, capable of ambushing prey with precision. Adults often weigh over 200 pounds, with a bite force powerful enough to pierce skulls and shells. Unlike most big cats, jaguars kill with a direct bite to the neck or head, crushing vital structures instantly. They're solitary, territorial, and silent hunters, often remaining undetected until the moment of attack. Reports of encounters were not rare in villages along the Rio Negro, though children often downplayed the warnings, believing such animals kept to deeper forests. Raphael's cousins later told police that they had noticed the flip phone's faint camera sound echoing when the underbrush shifted nearby. Before they could react, the jaguar erupted from the greenery. The animal closed the distance in a single bound, lunging upward and seizing Raphael by the neck, yanking him from the low tree in one violent motion. The boy's voice turned into a scream, cut short as the big cat dragged him into the thick vegetation. His cousins froze, then bolted back toward the river, shouting for help as Raphael's cries faded into the brush. Neighbors responded quickly, some carrying sticks, others grabbing rocks from the riverbank. They followed the sounds of growling and thrashing into the clearing. The noise was unmistakable. Deep snarls, the tearing of branches, and human cries struggling against it. Several men threw rocks into the undergrowth, shouting to drive the animal off. Witnesses later said they caught fleeting glimpses of the jaguar's spotted body dragging Raphael deeper into the thicket before it vanished from view. A heavy silence followed before the animal was startled enough to release its grip and slip into the forest. When the group reached Raphael, the damage was catastrophic. His throat had been crushed, blood pooling on the forest floor, and his chest bore deep bite marks from the struggle. No sound came from him. The adults carried the boy's body back to the village in silence, children trailing behind, shaken by what they had seen and heard. Authorities arrived the next morning. Officials examined the scene, confirming signs of a jaguar attack. Tracks in the dirt, drag marks through the vegetation, and blood patterns consistent with the predator's behavior. They set traps in the area, baited with meat, but the jaguar was never captured. Locals speculated it had returned deeper into the jungle, out of reach of human patrols. Raphael was buried in a small riverside cemetery within 2 days. The funeral drew family, neighbors, and classmates, who stood quietly as the priest delivered brief prayers. There were no large gatherings of press or officials. Only a short article in the local paper noted the death, calling it the loss of a boy to the dangers of the forest. The abandoned hunting camp where the attack occurred was later cleared by neighbors, who dismantled what remained of the structures to discourage children from returning. However, even as the Amazon's emerald canopy concealed another child's final moments, on Japan's remote Shiratoko Peninsula, a boy's laughter would soon turn to screams as he discovered that Hokkaido harbored brown bears whose massive claws could disembowel prey. It was May 28, 2018, on the Shiratoko Peninsula of Hokkaido, Japan. The spring evening was mild and still, the forested coastline stretching out beneath a pale sky. The air carried a damp coolness from the nearby sea. By nightfall, the school camping trip would end in horror, and a boy's laughter would be replaced by the sound of a predator's charge. Daichi Sato was 13 years old, the son of a delivery driver and a part-time store clerk from Sapporo. He was lively and restless, often testing limits at school but rarely malicious. His teachers described him as curious and energetic, a boy who liked to move ahead of the group rather than stay in line. For Daichi, the camping trip was a chance to explore beyond city limits and apartment blocks. He was fascinated by the wilderness, telling classmates that he wanted to see something real in the forest. Though young, Daichi was independent. He often dismissed rules he felt unnecessary, and on the trip he carried that same attitude. Teachers had repeated safety instructions: stay near the group, never wander off. But Daichi found them restrictive. He wasn't reckless in his own mind, only eager to explore. When his two closest friends followed him down the wooded path that evening, it felt to them like harmless mischief, a small adventure before dinner. The Shiratoko Peninsula was dense and quiet, its spruce and fir forests running down the cold beaches of black volcanic stone. As the students pitched tents on the clearing's edge, the forest loomed with a heavy stillness. Daichi and his friends wandered about 100 yards from camp, tossing stones into the undergrowth and laughing when they bounced off tree trunks. The forest was dim now, shadows stretching across the path. One boy noticed a flicker of movement between the trees, a dark bulk shifting against the fading light. A brown bear stepped out from cover, its head low, shoulders rolling forward with deliberate force. The boys froze. For a moment they stared, their laughter collapsing into silence. Brown bears, or higuma, are the largest land predators in Japan, with males weighing up to 900 pounds and capable of reaching speeds of 30 miles per hour. They feed on roots, berries, fish, and carrion, but will not hesitate to defend territory or attack if they sense threat or opportunity. In spring, bears often roam lower elevations in search of food, sometimes approaching human areas when hungry. Local wardens had issued notices earlier in the month about increased sightings near campsites. Teachers reminded students of the warnings, but to children, the idea of a bear encounter felt distant, almost unreal. The bear surged forward. The boys scattered in panic, two of them bolting back toward camp, voices breaking into high screams. Daichi, a step behind, stumbled as the bear closed the ground in seconds. It struck him hard across the chest and drove him into the forest floor. Witnesses back at camp later recalled hearing the distinct, piercing screams carrying out of the trees. The bear's jaws closed around Daichi's shoulder and upper back, teeth sinking deep as it shook him violently. The sound of tearing fabric and muffled cries carrying across the clearing. Its claws raked downward, tearing through his side. Daichi struggled, twisting under the weight, but the animal's bulk pinned him flat. Teachers rushed toward the noise, throwing stones and banging on metal pots in a desperate attempt to drive the bear away. The commotion only made the animal pause briefly before dragging Daichi by his upper body deeper into the wood. Some of the campers caught glimpses of the scene. Daichi's body jerking as the bear pulled him, his arms reaching upward before falling limp. The screams had stopped by then, replaced by the guttural huffing of the animal as it moved into denser brush. When teachers reached the edge of the trees, they saw only branches shaking and leaves scattering. They dared not follow further, and instead called the authorities. Within half an hour, local wardens arrived carrying rifles. They searched the area until dusk, but the bear had vanished into thickets impossible to penetrate safely. A short distance from camp, they found Daichi's remains. His body bore catastrophic injuries, his clothing shredded, and his small pack torn open and scattered in the dirt. The next morning, the school transported students back to Sapporo under police escort. Grief counselors were arranged for the children, many of whom had been close enough to hear Daichi's final moments. His funeral took place days later, classmates filling the rows of a modest hall. Authorities organized patrols across the peninsula, and within a week, shot a large male bear near the site. Officials stated it was likely the same animal, but admitted uncertainty. Local residents remained uneasy, some skeptical that the right bear had been killed. Thanks for watching. If these brutal and graphic stories of peaceful moments turning deadly entertained you, click here for more.